Well, hello. It is good to see everybody, and I am going to start today the way I do almost every week. I want to welcome our campuses, and so for those of you at our Kenosha campus, hello. Our Racine campus, we welcome you. Our online campus, we have a lot of people who watch in different parts of the country, and so we want to welcome you as well, and thank you for making this a part of your weekly experience. And of course, our Weekends on Wednesday campus, where every week we serve unlimited prime rib. I mean popcorn. We serve popcorn every single week, so you can join us. Here's the deal. If you are just joining us and you haven't been around for a while, we are in week 2 of a series that we're calling Relationship Restart. And so I just want to say how proud I am of you, and I mean this, for showing up. Because if you have a really healthy relationship, it's easy to say, I don't need this in my life. Well, we're doing good. Or if you got a really bad relationship and things are really tense, it's easy to just kind of dismiss a series like this and say, I don't think a series is going to help us. And of course, there's many of you who are single. And it'd be easy just to skip out on this series. I ran into a lady for the first time on Sunday, this past Sunday, and she said, hey, I'm here for the relationship series. And I said, are you here with your man? What's going on? And she said, you know what? I'm actually single, but I feel like this is the best time in my life to be working on me. So I high-fived her. I was like, man, super, super proud of you. So here's the deal. There is a note sheet inside your program. If you want to follow along, we are going to have a bunch of things pop up on the screen today, things that are going to be worth writing down because it will be easy to forget once you get home. For those of you who missed last week because of snowpocalypse or snowmageddon or whatever you want to refer to the 3 inches of snow we got here in southeast Wisconsin, we talked about the biggest threat to any relationship. And it's not what you think it is, right? The biggest threat to any relationship is a little word called drift. And what we said is regardless of whether your relationship is something you would consider healthy or is unhealthy, it is absolutely possible to drift emotionally, to drift recreationally, to drift intellectually, to drift physically, to drift spiritually from each other. And what we said is if you drift long enough and you drift far enough, eventually you're going to feel distant from your partner. And that is a very dangerous place to be. And so what we talked about last week is how to put down anchors in a relationship, right? How to make sure that we don't drift any farther than we are, and then we'll start working on getting closer to each other. And so right now, if you're in a relationship and you can identify some areas in which you've drifted from each other, my hope is that in this teaching series, you'll be given the tools to start coming closer together. That this series will give you the motivation needed to have a restart in your relationship. And if you say you need a restart in your relationship, I just want to free you from any shame that would have. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean you failed as a couple. Doesn't mean you married the wrong person. It just means that for whatever reason, what you've been doing isn't working. A couple weeks ago, I walked into the office of one of our staff members, and 2 of our staff members are in the office, and they're hovered over a computer. And I asked, what's going on, guys? And they said, we're trying to get this computer to sync up with this thing that was plugged into it, but it wasn't recognizing it. And I said, my guess would be you should try to restart the computer and see what happens. And they've been working on it for a while. They said, we'll try that. And sure enough, it worked. So not only am I the pastor of Great Lakes Church, I am Geek Squad for Great Lakes Church, right? But sometimes what we're doing and how we're approaching our relationship isn't working, so we need to restart. And so much of the reason that often what we're doing isn't working is because what we're trying are things that, quite honestly, we learned from our parents or our friends or culture, not bad things, but different messages that we picked up that we thought would work that for whatever reason do not work for us. Relationship messages that we said, hey, this is the way it should be. It's called Marketing 101, right? When we hear a message enough times, whether it's from our parents, from our friends, from culture, when we hear a message enough times, it gets into our head, it gets into our thinking. We think this is the way to approach things in life. And if you want to dismiss that, if you want to say that's not true, messages really don't affect us, they don't get into our brains all that much. Just for fun, I want to see how well marketing companies have done by getting something stuck in our head. If you're at one of our campuses, you can certainly not, can you play along? You are expected to play along. If you are at home sitting in your boxers streaming online, you can play along as well. But let's just see how well they've done. See if you can finish this commercial. 800-588-2300. Yeah, they did a pretty good job, didn't they? Or how about on this week we're thinking about love, every kiss begins with K. Yeah, K Jewelers. Come on. They've done a great job. This has been going on for decades. Give me a break. Give me a break. Break me off a piece. Yeah. And, of course, Chance the Rapper's actually brought that whole jingle to another level. All right, here's one that's been going on for a very, very long time, drilled into us. Oh, I wish I were in. Good news is I know some of you, and you are. All right, how about this one? The best part of waking up. Yeah, now thankfully our coffee selection has come a long way since Folgers, but it really does go back to this idea. If we hear a message enough times, it gets stuck in our head. And we don't think about this much, but ever since we're kids, we've been bombarded with messages on what love and sex and dating and relationships is supposed to look and feel like. Right? We're inundated with messages from fairy tales and magazines and romance novels and love songs and poems that create this very idealistic and exaggerated view of love. And then you throw in reality TV or romantic movies, and it just gets way more complicated. We just have this very intense and exaggerated view, right? The Beauty and the Beast, giving all of us guys a little bit of hope, right? Or The Notebook, so sappy, and we all want to be that couple. Or this is a couple decades old now. Remember Titanic? You got Rose on the bow of this ship, and it's just like winds blowing, and just, Jack, I'm flying, Jack. And it's just like, okay, that's a little intense. And then it gets to the end of the movie, and she's laying on some door in the ocean as everything's sinking, and she's holding onto Jack's hands, and she's saying what? I'm never gonna let you go, Jack. I'm never gonna let you go. I'm never gonna let you go. And then what does she do? She lets him go. Now, the problem is we all know that that door had some room on it. All she needed to do was move over a little bit, right? That's a little bit of selfishness there. Of course, some of you have a king-size bed, and that's how you feel every night when you sleep next to your spouse. Like, give me a little bit of room here. But very early on in life, we start to develop this picture in our mind of love, and everything's emotional and sensual and passionate and exciting and filled with drama and secrets and fireworks. And the good news is that there is a large portion of our relationship that should feel that way, that can feel that way. Like that is part of being in a relationship. But what's also true is that every relationship has conflict. And that's rarely talked about in fairy tales and in romantic movies. If you are in a relationship with another human being, the fact is you're going to have different ways of approaching life. And you're going to have different opinions. And you're going to have different beliefs on a variety of topics. As a couple, you're going to have different worldviews. And that's because, quite honestly, you just grew up in different homes and you had different sets of parents. Assuming you're not from Union Grove, because it gets a little bit iffy. But here's the deal. As two very different individuals from two very different backgrounds, inevitably there's going to be disagreements and conflict, which is why we're not going to spend any time today talking about how to eliminate conflict and how to get rid of our differences, because those things are never going away. Instead, what I want to do is I want to talk about how to deal with conflict and how to approach it in a healthy way, which I can tell you firsthand because I'm such an intense and emotional individual, I know feels impossible. Right? When there's conflict going on, it doesn't feel like it's even remotely possible to deal with it in a healthy way. Because at some point in the conflict, it starts to feel like, okay, this is a competition, and the only thing I care about is who is going to win. And it probably goes without saying, but I am a pretty competitive individual. All right? I love competition. Unfortunately, God did not give me an athletic bone in my body other than for playing foosball. Okay, that's pretty much the extent of my athletic ability. But I love watching sports. I have been engaged in the Olympics recently. I don't play board games all the time, but when I do, I get competitive. Right? Any other competitive people when you play different games? All right, we have a very relaxed weekends on Wednesday crew. All right? So different games. I've never played this game, but Justin, I took it out of his collection, Cards Against Humanity. I don't know. So here's the deal. Here's the deal. When it comes to competition, in order for the competition to remain fair, it has to at some point, we could go through all of these and what the rules are, but at some point it has to have rules. Otherwise, it just gets out of control. Everybody does what they want to do, and it becomes chaotic. All right, this was the reality in the early days of boxing. There wasn't a set of rules that people had to follow, and so as everybody did what they saw as right in their own eyes, and they would hurt each other in extreme ways. And so in the late 1800s, John Douglas, also known as the Marquis of Queensberry, sat down and wrote out the rules, what he proposed to be for the sport of boxing, and they were adopted. Right? No more kicking and gouging, no more hitting below the belt, no more headbutting, no more biting off the ear of your opponent. I mean, he had some rules that he came up with, and just because there were rules put in place didn't mean people had to follow them. So part of the Marquis of Queensberry regulations was there had to be a referee. Now, the referee, their job is to make sure that the rules are being followed. And so to this day, whenever there's a boxing match about to begin, right, the referee steps in between the opponents and reviews the basic rules. Now, don't miss this. The referee isn't there to stop the fight. They're just there to make sure that the two opponents fight fair. Well, in marriage, this is a challenge because in marriage, there are no official rules that we're forced to follow. Right? In marriage, there is no referee that's going to stop the conflict from getting out of control. And so if we want to have a healthy relationship as couples, we have to develop the discipline to set our own rules and be our own referees. And so let's talk about what that looks like. Now, the first thing we do in any competition is we identify the opponent. Okay, whether it's going to be a board game we're playing or it's going to be a game of basketball or video game that we're engaged in, we have to identify who is the opponent. Well, the same is true in marriage. When a conflict is about to unfold, it's very important to identify the opponent. And this may be news to you, but the opponent is never your spouse. The opponent is never your spouse. If you see your spouse as the opponent, you're never going to win because you and your spouse are one. Now, I know it doesn't always feel that way, but you are. You're legally one. You're spiritually one. Before God, you're one. Before family, you're one. Before friends, you're one. All throughout the ancient scriptures, we come across different terms that describe the oneness of a relationship between husbands and wives. Terms like companion and co-laborer and Instagram husband. And so just think about this. The one-sentence summary of a marriage relationship that we read over and over and over again in the Bible is this. A man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. You are one with your spouse. A couple of years ago, there was a guy in California. He broke into a couple's home, and he was intending to steal some things from them when he was confronted by the male homeowner. And then things got ugly. The intruder ends up attacking the homeowner with a baseball bat. So he's attacking him with this bat. Well, thankfully, the homeowner was able to break free, and he ends up getting this intruder in a bear hug type of hold, at which point the guy's wife picks up the baseball bat, and she gets in on it, and she starts to hurt the intruder with the bat, and eventually he escapes. Very intense story. But it has a pretty decent ending. Nobody ends up dying. Okay, the intruder was arrested, after he checked himself in at a local hospital under a fake name. He was bruised up pretty badly, and so they had to look into what had happened. Now, I tell you that story because I want us to imagine what would have happened if when the intruder was taking the bat and was beating her husband, if the wife would have stepped in and said, I told you to get a security system. This is your fault. Or imagine if while her husband's being attacked, she would have said, I've been telling you to work out. Look at him. Dude, he's got you. He absolutely has got you. Well, of course that wouldn't happen. That'd be ridiculous because the husband wasn't the problem. The intruder was the problem. Well, when it comes to conflict in a relationship, the opponent is never our spouse. The opponent is always the tension or the problem that we're experiencing. It's always the tension or the problem that's happening in the relationship. And I'm intentionally using two different words, tension and problem, because every relationship, whether it's a father-son relationship, a husband-wife relationship, a friend relationship, a relationship between coworkers, in every relationship, there's always going to be tensions and problems. And there's a world of difference between those two terms. And the reason it's important we recognize the difference is because how we approach them is very different. Right? When it comes to tensions in a relationship, tensions need to be managed. Tensions need to be managed. Now, tensions are just simply the frustrations that we have with one another based on personality differences, based on who we are as individuals. So one of the books that I read in preparing for this series is called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by Dr. John Gottman. All right, I mentioned Gottman last week. The dude is a big geek. He does lots of studies and research on relationships. And one of the things he's discovered is that 70% of the conflicts in our relationship are perpetual. They're always going to be present in our relationship because they're simply hardwired into who we are as human beings. They have to do with our background and our personality and the natural bend we have in life. So put another way, 70% of the problems in our relationship are never going away. That's again because they're based on the differences of who we are as individuals. One of you is a morning person, the other's a night owl. One of you likes to save, the other's a tightwad. One of you likes to cuddle, the other's a porcupine. One of you is an extrovert, the other's an introvert. One of you is a vegetarian, the other likes good food. One of you is a clean freak, the other's a slob. One of you is prompt, the other's late. One of the big opponents that we encounter in every relationship are the tensions we experience with each other. And since the reality is that most of the tensions we have with each other are just never going away, one of the best things we can do is learn how to be patient with each other and accepting. Easier said than done, granted. But in the first century, the Apostle Paul writes this. He says, therefore, accept each other just as Christ has accepted you so that God will be given glory. I don't know if you think about this much, but God accepts you fully and completely as you are right now. Fully and completely. And the reason he accepts you isn't because you're in running for the Pope. The reason he accepts you isn't because everybody thinks you would be a great mascot for Christianity because of how you live your life. No, it's because God is filled with grace and he's filled with love and he's filled with mercy. And so, if we're going to learn how to defeat the opponent of tension, we're going to learn how to have to be patient and accepting with each other. And most of the tensions we have aren't actually going to be defeated. They're just going to be managed. The other opponent that we're constantly fighting in a relationship is what we would call legit problems. And problems need to be solved. Problems need to be solved. Drift, which we talked about last week, is a real problem. Because if it happens too long, eventually you feel separated from each other. It can lead to resentment. It can lead to infidelity. It can lead to all sorts of issues, so it has to be addressed. Lack of appreciation in a relationship is a problem. Lack of boundaries is a problem. Financial pressure is a problem. And whenever there are problems in a relationship, they need to be solved. They need to be fixed. But quite honestly, one of the reasons we have so much conflict in a relationship, the reason we get frustrated, the reason we become disillusioned with each other is because most of the time we get this backward. We spend so much time trying to solve tensions. You have to become a night person. I stay up at night. I want to spend time with you. You have to be better at getting there on time. You have to be better at spending money the way I spend it, right? We spend so much time trying to solve tensions and manage problems when in reality, we need to learn how to manage tensions and solve problems. So when it comes to conflict, we have to identify the opponent. Who are we fighting? Is it a tension or a problem? And then, in order to defeat our opponent, we need to fight as a team. To defeat the opponent, we have to fight as a team. Now I'm going to say it again. I know, because I see this in my wife, right? I know when the emotions are all over the place and there's a tension that needs to be managed or a problem that needs to be fixed and solved, I realize it doesn't feel even possible to fight as one. Which is why it's important to remind ourselves of this reality. How we treat each other when we're not fighting is the biggest indicator of how we will treat each other when we are fighting. So if when conflict is not taking place, we have a culture in our home of respecting each other and talking kindly to each other and being loving and respectful to one another, that's gonna carry on into our conflict. It doesn't mean we're gonna feel good. It just means those character traits are gonna continue. But if we have a culture of disrespect and we rarely treat each other with kindness or with love, then when there's a conflict taking place, that's gonna be fueled. And so the opponent is the tension or problem. To defeat the opponent, we need to fight as a team. That being said, if we're gonna win at conflict without losing at love, we need to learn how to set up the conflict and play by the rules. How to set up the conflict and play by the rules, all right? So if this were a game of Monopoly, right? If we're gonna play a game of Monopoly, we'd put down the board, everybody would get a certain sum of money, everybody would get a playing piece, we'd put the chance cards out, the community chest cards out, we'd put the mortgage cards out and all the different properties, right? We'd take out the dice and we'd start to play the game. Well, the setup for relationship conflicts is really straightforward. It's all about timing and tone. Timing and tone. The setup for conflict is all about time and tone. There's a good time to argue, and there's a bad time to argue. If you're having dinner together as a family, bad time. If you're about to go to bed and one of you is extremely exhausted, bad time. If one of you is highly emotional, bad time. If you're shopping together at Costco, bad time. And again, I know it's not always possible to pick the best time, but generally speaking, a good time is when there's few interruptions. A good time is when you don't have a meeting coming up in 30 minutes. A good time is when you're both feeling somewhat energized and awake. A good time is when you feel somewhat stable in your emotions. And if your schedule looks anything like mine, which I know many of you have very similar schedules, if not even busier schedules, it just feels impossible. Like, when is that gonna happen? When am I gonna have that kind of space in my day? So if it is a real issue that needs to be addressed, then I would suggest schedule it. Just say, hey, listen, we're on the same team. Let's just keep reminding ourselves of that. We're on the same team. Can we talk about this on Friday evening? Can we talk about this on Saturday morning? Can we talk about this at a different time? To set up a conflict, timing is important, but so is tone. Okay, a couple days ago, I was in an all-day meeting. Now, no secret, I hate meetings. And I'm restless at meetings, and I can barely focus at meetings. And so I don't know of a meeting I've been at, including all-day meetings, where I ever sit. I just pace the whole time. And so I'm at this meeting, and my phone keeps ringing, and finally I look at it, and it's my wife. So I assume, hey, she needs to get a hold of me. This is super important. And so I skipped out of the meeting for a moment, and I called her, and I said, hey, I'm just calling you back. What's going on? And then she starts to give me this play-by-play detail of a meeting she had just been in. This was no emergency. right? She's just talking, and so I see where this is going. A couple minutes into it, I just say, hey, Rindy? And she goes, oh, hey, Dave? Do you know how many times you do that to me when I'm trying to talk to you? And she goes, let me guess, you're busy, because you're always busy. And I said, I am. Right now, Rindy, I promise you, I want to hear what you're saying, but I'm in an all-day meeting. I just skipped out because I thought this might be a semi-emergency, super important. Can we talk about this later? And she was frustrated. Now, here's the deal. She had reason to be frustrated with me, because I was like, hey, Rindy, right? But what I was doing wasn't wrong. I was busy. I was in a meeting. I was trying. But it was just, here's the deal. My tone, hey, Rindy, which I didn't realize I use as much as I do, was short and abrupt. And the wrong tone communicates the wrong message. The wrong tone will cause you to start fighting each other instead of the problem or tension, which is why King Solomon of Israel wrote this. He said, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. In one of his many books, Dr. Gottman writes about something he calls harsh startups. He says, when you walk into a conversation, which is going to turn into conflict, and it starts out with blaming the other person, that's harsh. When it starts out with accusations, when you speak in generalizations, you always do this. He said, those are harsh statements. When you use the phrase you, over and over, that's harsh. And so here's what Gottman says about harsh startups. He says, my research shows that if your discussion begins with a harsh startup, it will inevitably end on a negative note. Statistics tell the story. 96% of the time, you can predict the outcome of a conversation based on the first 3 minutes of the interaction. That is huge. If you want to win at conflict without losing at love, the setup is all about timing and tone. So when you discipline yourself to use I statements, I feel this way, I'm going through, that's a soft startup. When you use appreciation to communicate your desire, I love spending time with you. We haven't been able to do that for a while. Could you set aside this time next week so we could go on a date together? That's a soft startup. When you're able to articulate disappointments in very specific ways rather than generalizations, that's a soft startup. Now, if you say, hey, this is an area I struggle in, you can always go to the homepage of our website. And every Sunday, I update it with more resources. But the homepage of our website, click on current series. It'll say Relationship Restart. And you'll be able to see some different resources there that will help you in understanding the difference between a harsh startup and a soft startup. But as a couple, if you can master setting up the conflict, the rules are going to be easy to follow. And the rules are pretty straightforward. There's just 2 of them. Rule number 1, tune in. Tune in. Pay attention to what your spouse is saying. Pay attention to what your partner's saying. Read not only what they're saying with their words, but read their body language. One of the greatest gifts you can give your spouse is attention. And since there's lots of distractions going on around us, you'll have to do what you can to eliminate distractions. All right? So if you have a cell phone, which is 2018, if you don't have a cell phone, you need to leave the service immediately and just go get one. If I'm assuming everybody has a cell phone. You're in buildings, right? Office buildings where you're like, I'm not getting reception. What do? You need to talk to someone. You find a place. You do what you can to get the reception you need. Well, in a relationship, we have to do what we can to give the attention to our spouse that they need. That might be shut the laptop. Turn off the TV. Get rid of the magazines around us. Put our kids in the refrigerator for an hour. Do what we can to focus. Solomon writes this. He says, ears to hear and eyes to see. Both are gifts from the Lord. When we use our eyes to connect with our spouse, when we use our ears and we genuinely tune in, we have such a good chance of understanding and truly hearing what they're trying to communicate. Now, you're probably still going to disagree. It's not like you're going to be like, that was so insightful. I've never thought about it that way. But you have a better chance of seeing from their perspective. And if you want your partner to know that you've truly tuned in, then after they've presented some of their thoughts, give them a couple reasons you agree with them. And then you can say, but here's a reason I don't agree with you. All right, so rule number 1, tune in. Rule number 2, talk truthfully and tactfully. Talk truthfully and tactfully. Recently, there was a husband who was hinting at his wife about what he wanted for their upcoming anniversary. So he said, hey, I'm just hoping for something really shiny that goes from 0 to 300 in less than 10 seconds. So she bought him a bathroom scale. All right? Rule number 2 is all about being tactful and truthful. Any corporation that's really good at selling merchandise knows the power of good marketing. They know about how to package things, right? Back in the 70s, some of you remember Gary Dahl. He became a millionaire because he was creative in marketing the pet rock. Sold over 1.5 million of these pets, which kids could have dug up in their backyards. How you package your opinion, how you package your philosophy, how you package your preferred approach to dealing with a tension or a problem is often more important than what your opinion actually is or your approach actually is. It makes that big of a difference. Again, King Solomon, who we're looking at for so many of the things on relationships, writes this. He says, some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. It's a whole lot easier to stay focused on the tension or the problem and not the person if the words you're using are gentle words and gracious words and pleasant words. So talking tactfully will help you resolve conflict, but talking truthfully is just as important, which is why we got to guard ourselves from exaggerating. We got to guard ourselves from using terms like, you always do this, and you never do this. The Apostle Paul, he states his goal of being truthful when he writes these words. He writes, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ. Now, I'm going to tell you from personal experience, the hardest part of speaking the truth in love is learning to communicate what I'm truthfully feeling. Because my go-to when I'm ticked off is I'm pissed right now. I'm angry. You make me so upset when you do this, right? My vocabulary is so limited. And so if I want to communicate truthfully, I have to learn to broaden my vocabulary. This is probably the area I've grown the most in the last couple of months. Yes, I'm angry, but why? Right? I feel unappreciated. I feel unheard. I feel like you don't value what I do when I do this, right? Maybe you feel helpless or confused or rejected. So mature couples, you want to be a mature couple? Learn to use this phrase. I feel blank when you blank. I feel hurt when you talk to me that way. I feel embarrassed when you tell your friends that story. I feel happy when you wear that to bed, right? Whatever phrase you want to use. Learning to speak the truth in love requires us to identify our feelings and articulate them. So again, I'm going to put some resources on the website, and one of the things I'll put on there are some of the emotions that we feel that go past I'm angry and I'm ticked. Right? So the setup of a conflict, all about timing and tone. The rules of a conflict, tune in and talk truthfully and tactfully. If we can learn to do those things, we will effectively attack the opponent together and we will win. And winning isn't about fixing every problem, and it's not about everything working out happily ever after. The win is simply growing as a team. The win is saying, hey, we're growing together. We're learning to understand each other more. We're compromising more. So when Rindy says to me, I feel like you're doing a better job at understanding me, guess what? That's a win. The win is not, I agree with her on everything. Right? We're two different human beings. And if you're married for a while, you know how difficult this can be. So for Rindy and I, the area that we have struggled with for a long time is, in the area of understanding, is when it comes to our kids. Because my wife will straight up tell you that I'm way too rigid and strict with our children. And I'll tell you, she enables our kids. Right? Just two very different approaches. And so recently we actually sat down for a while and we wrestled through this. Like, you always think I'm too rigid and too strict, but I definitely think you enable our kids. And bottom line, here's what surfaced. For Rindy, her priority is that our kids feel valued and loved. Absolute priority. I want our kids to know they're loved and valued. For me, I assume they feel loved and valued. They live at my house. They got food on the table, right? I assume they feel valued and loved. And so for me, my priority is raising kids who are independent. Solomon writes this. He says, joyful is the person who finds wisdom, the one who gains understanding. Anytime you and your spouse understand each other, it is a win. This is one of the reasons why it's important to have an updated love map of our spouse. We talked about that last week. There's resources on our website. But it's important to have a current view and understanding of your spouse. But winning, of course, and growing with our spouse isn't just about understanding them. It's about compromise. Okay, nobody's going to ever get everything they want. Apostle Paul writes, don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Okay, so compromise, I'm just going to tell you, doesn't feel perfect ever. That's because in every compromise, both people win something and both people lose something. But if you both walk away saying, man, we feel more valued, more loved, more respected, man, that is a huge win. So it's possible to win at conflict without losing at love. But you got to set up the conflict right, and you got to play by the rules. And I'm just going to tell you this. So here's what we'll wrap it up with this. If at some level you hurt your spouse because you break the rules, you don't set it up right, and now there's just damage that's being done, if you want to have a restart in your relationship at that moment, you just have to learn to apologize. We need to become experts at apologizing and forgiving. And so I'll wrap it up with this. A true apology sounds like this. I am sorry. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? What can I do to make it right? It'd be awesome if we just memorized those words. I am wrong. Or I'm sorry, I was wrong. Will you forgive me? What can I do to make it right? And then if you're the person who's being apologized to, just to be clear, forgiveness doesn't mean you forget right away. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you trust right away, that you're just all emotional and loving right away. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't need to put up boundaries for a while. At its very core, forgiveness is just choosing to not retaliate. It's saying, you said something to me, but I'm not going to say something hurtful to you. You brought up my past, but I'm not going to bring up your past. So the opponent is not our spouse. The opponent are the problems and the tensions in our relationship. And if we want to have healthy relationships, every time that we experience tensions and problems, we have to discipline ourselves to fight those tensions and problems together. We have to set up the conflict correctly, and we've got to play by the rules. And if for some reason we're not doing good at setting it up and playing by the rules, maybe we bring in another referee, a professional marriage counselor, someone who can help us. My wife and I have spent a whole lot of time in marriage counseling. Whole lot of time. We're so drastically different, but sometimes you just need another referee. It's possible to win at conflict without losing at love. Next week, I'm going to talk about the crazy cycle and how to stop it. If you say, we get in the crazy cycle a lot in our home, we're going to talk about how do you stop it when you're in this crazy cycle that just can't seem to be broken. I want to remind you every Sunday evening throughout the series at 8:30 p.m., on Facebook, we have Tony and Michelle Peterson, two of our staff members, doing a Facebook Live on something we're calling Relationship Restart After Hours. And they'll just keep building on what I talked about today. They'll have a question and answer part. I watched last week. I tuned in. Lots of good stuff. And I really loved when they started talking about how to engage with the person that you are married to. So we're going to close, and let's just close by reading our big idea and key verse. Here it is. Big idea, love is a verb. Love requires action. It requires a movement of some sort. Key verse for the series, love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of couples at Great Lakes Church who would stand up and say, man, we had tough seasons in our marriage, but we are happy today. We love each other deeply because we endured. We kept pushing through, and that's my hope for every one of you. Heavenly Father, as we leave here today, give us the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen.